In 1328, the Treaty of Edinburgh, Northampton had brought an end to the First War of Scottish Independence. You know, the war with all the wacky characters. Anyway, this treaty humiliated Edward III as it forced him to recognize big man Robert the Bruce and his heirs as the rightful rulers of Scotland. The treaty also stated that the border between Scotland and England would be drawn as it was under the reign of the Scottish King Alexander III. But of course, the cherry on the pie was that Scotland would finally be a fully independent nation.
It's bloody beautiful, innit?
One can only imagine that Edward III of England felt resentment to this treaty. After all, it had been negotiated by his mother, the Dowager Queen Isabella, and her rumored lover, Roger Mortimer. The two of them had helped dispose of Edward's father, King Edward II. This left the couple the de facto leaders of the country, with Edward III being a mere puppet. Eddie wouldn't keep taking it. Those who had wronged him would suffer. But for now, he could only concede and plot his vengeance. Meanwhile, the fortune of Scotland had taken a turn for the worse. In 1329, local hero Robert the Bruce died, fulfilled, knowing that his lifelong dream of Scotland had been accomplished. Enter David II, the oldest remaining son of Robert the Bruce and his mother, Elizabeth, who had passed away from falling from a horse 18 months earlier. At the time of his father's passing, David was only 5 years old, and the future of Scotland would depend on him. He was crowned as King of Scots at Scone on December 24, 1331. However, a small child brain was no match for big government business. Guys, I don't even know how to write, and I poop my pants sometimes. So, a Guardian of Scotland was assigned. Entered Thomas Randolph, who would serve as Guardian of Scotland to get me stones. Enter Donald II, Earl of Mar, who would guide the young king to great. Enter Sir Andrew Murray, a great warrior and poet who would. Enter Sir Archibald. Meanwhile, to the south, Edward's vengeance against the Scots had started to take shape. Now free from the shackles of his mother Isabella and Roger Mortimer, he forged a secret alliance. The plot included Edward Balliol, son of former Scottish King John Balliol, who had been king before Robert the Bruce's accession. He would now serve as pretender of the Scottish crown. Backing this dark alliance was a group of nobles called the Disinherited, who are, contrary to their name, not an edgy Swedish vegan heavy metal band, but a group of Scottish nobles who had sided with the English in the previous war and had their lands stripped by Robert the Bruce. Balliol's expedition set out by sea. Edward III didn't sanction an invasion by land, as it may have been a little too obvious a breach of the Treaty of Edinburgh, but he didn't mind turning a blind eye to an invasion by sea. Balliol's expedition was small, with only 1,500 men. 500 of them were well equipped and trained men-at-arms, and another 1,000 infantry, most of whom were longbowmen. The small army was not a problem for the pretender. After all, Balliol expected many Scots to join his cause once he had landed on the Scottish shores. He had also been in secret communication with Domnall, the Earl of Mar, who was commanding most of the Scottish forces. It was his hope that Domnall would also come to his side. They finally landed at Wester Kinghorn, south of Perth. The boats silently crept up to the foggy shores of Wester Kinghorn. The men anxious, not knowing what awaited them beyond the dunes. As they made their cumbersome disembarkment, war horns sounded in the deep. From the fog and over the dunes emerged an army many times larger than that of the English. They were commanded by Duncan, the Earl of Fife, and Robert Bruce, a bastard son of the late Robert the Bruce. The overwhelming Scottish force was divided into the Scottish Schiltrons, a huge block of men carrying spears and pikes, certain to drive any enemy off the battlefield. Determined to drive the invaders into the sea, the Schiltrons began their slow advance. Meanwhile, the outnumbered English began their desperate stance. The longbowmen opened up with a hail of arrows, drawing back at least 80 pounds over and over again. The Scots were tightly packed and moved slow, an ideal target for any archer. Under this assault of arrows, some of the Scottish infantry began to buckle and lose cohesion. Those who did manage to reach the English lines found themselves facing well-equipped men-at-arms who were more than capable of holding back any of the Scottish advances. Due to the sheer brutality of the arrow fire, the Scots became disheartened at their losses. Duncan and Robert decided to retreat to fight another day. Edward Balliol had won a great victory against overwhelming odds. He had now properly set foot on Scottish soil, and with this new confidence, he was ready to march on Perth to meet the main Scottish army. Robert and Duncan's armies had been routed from the battlefield. They turned north towards the safety of the city Perth. Edward was free to forage the countryside and managed to loot an unguarded Scottish armory. Afterwards, he turned north towards Perth. Here, Domhnall, the Earl of Mar, had gathered his army. The remnants of Duncan and Robert joined with him. The English and the Scots would find themselves on opposite banks of the River Erne. Edward's small army was no doubt in good spirits after having repulsed a much larger Scottish force. As they drew up towards the banks of the River Erne, their mood would take a turn for the worse. Across the river lay the armies of Domhnall, Earl of Mar, and Robert Bruce, the bastard son of Robert the Bruce, who Edward had defeated at the beach landing. Modern estimates tally the Scottish army at around 15,000 to 40,000 men, which meant that they outnumbered the English at least tenfold. They had also destroyed the bridge across the River Erne, making any crossing a dangerous affair. We can only guess what thoughts raced through Edward's mind upon seeing the Scottish army well entrenched on the other side of the river. How could his small force ever make the assault? And so Edward pondered his next move, and night fell. Both armies still found themselves on opposite sides of the River Erne. The Scots were so confident in their victory that they had already taken to festivities, playing, drinking, and making merry. Edward, in the meantime, made his move. The Scots had left few sentries to watch any crossing by the English. Edward managed to find an unguarded ford, and under the cover of night, made his move across the river. Now, on the other side of the river, the English began their silent advance in the dark of night. It was not long until they stumbled upon the camp of the Scots. Drunk and tired, unaware they had been flanked. The English stormed the Scottish camp, slaughtering anyone they could get their hands on. The unprepared Scots had no choice but to flee or die where they stood. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. I consider this my first full project. I still have a lot to learn and a lot to improve on, but I do sincerely hope you guys enjoyed watching it. And if you did, please like and subscribe to my channel. It's only 2 clicks, but it means everything to me. The second video will be out shortly, so please stay tuned.